What was worship like in the early church? Although we like to imagine services in the church have always been like they are now, worship practices of the early church were a theologically rich creation. First, rooted in the church's origins in Judaism. Second, with very different experiences. And third, filled with complex spiritual and theological symbolism. The first Christian service was in AD 33, and by AD 54 there was a guide, and it was almost fully developed by 140 AD. Liturgy comes from a Greek term, and it is rooted, and Christian services were rooted in synagogue worship. They consisted of, first, a profession of faith, second, prayer, third, readings, fourth, a sermon, and fifth, a priestly blessing. In a liturgy, there was first an invocation, second, a prayer for intercession, third, readings from the scripture, fourth, sermons, 5, dismissal of the catechumens, which means those who had not been baptized yet were left the premises. And then, finally, the Eucharist, which actually translates to Thanksgiving. And this happened at every gathering. The Romans started to be curious about it around 111 AD, and Pliny the Younger described what he found from torturing Christians in a letter to Caesar. And that letter also references two-part services. The synagogue and Passover were also important inspirations. The Didache also listed some more important parts of the service, and they told of a pledge to say, and formed a hierarchy in the church, and the bishop would also sit on a cathedra, which is a type of throne. Second were the services, which have been described by Paul. He said they were noisy and disorganized, and it said it was important to not have too many people talking at once, and women were separated. And Paul said, quote, "Women are to be silent in the churches," unquote, and later continues that, quote, "that a woman should make her voice heard in the church is not right," unquote. This is theorized that it would actually have been because she would have had to unveil herself to participate, which would break the rules for modesty. And Paul also suggested physical separation for men and women, and this was also supported by other saints too. Third, Paul explained the Eucharist. It is an intense take, and what's needed to know is, and one of the most important things for people who partook in it to know was, quote, was similar. Sorry. It was an intense take on what we now think of it today, And St. Ignatius of Loyola said, quote, I desire the bread of life, which is the flesh of Jesus Christ, unquote. And it's talked about in the Didache too. They were vehemently for it being seen as the the body and blood of Christ. They also said to participate, one must be baptized. And Eucharist was much based on the showbread of the temple. It also provides the key transition from the Old to New Testaments. They needed the catechumen, baptism, and christenation or confirmation to partake in it. The Didache also mentions how to baptize. It is confirmation is based on the Gospel of John, and Justin Martyr described it too. He said it was similar, with 10 steps, and there were chants too. Mass actually comes from the word missa, and it is the first known order of it comes from a manuscript known as the Leonine. So, even though we like to pretend in our minds sometimes that church services around the emergence of the early church were similar to how they are today, they were actually very much different and highly rooted in the church's origins in Judaism, with a very different experience to what we think of it, how it happens now, and it was filled with complex scriptural and theological symbolism. Thank you.